So in the morning, we're still in the morning, but in the previous session, a lot of what we were talking about was the need for a new styles of leadership, and for leaders to be able to work with communication technologies and new platforms and new structures. And what we are going to focus on in this panel follows through very naturally from that, and is starting to look at the world of symbols and the symbolic, and how can we begin and how can we help leaders manipulate symbols and symbolic initiatives to change the way we think about possibilities. Yeah? And if I think about the work of someone called Mel Young, he created the Homeless World Cup. Some of you might have heard of that. That was an extraordinary initiative to change the way ordinary people see homeless people and imagine can see their humanity and their possibilities. If you think about the work of Daniel Barenboim, the classical conductor, he created the West Eastern Divan Orchestra, and sort of quite radically changed the way some people see and perceive the possibilities of unity between Palestinians and Israelis. But of course, some of that is subject to the people that have the actual experience of the concert or of the football match and so on. And so some of the issues that we need to start thinking about is how we use media, large media platforms to reach millions. And so let me just turn quickly to James Painter. James, you already introduced yourself. You're former correspondent of the BBC for Latin America. And you very recently launched a book that was very provocative, and you became sort of a minor celebrity.
Okay. You can get that far.
That is basically looking at critiquing the role of journalism in how journalists communicate and use science and scientific evidence to change the way we perceive climate change and other problems. Can you tell us a bit more about that and how do you see journalists?
I'll be very quick. Is my mic working okay? Yeah. Okay, very, very quickly, we did a 12-country study of how the media, print media and online media reported the Copenhagen summit. And one of the big headline news out of that, because there are so many Brazilians here, I'll let you know that Brazil and India had by far the most coverage of the Copenhagen summit of any countries in the world, which may surprise many, many people. They would have thought that the UK or the USA or Australia or some of the Western countries would have had most, but Brazil by far and India by far had the most coverage in the print media. And in all the surveys that we've done in the BBC as well over the last 2 or 3 years, it may interest you to know that Brazil is often the country that comes out amongst the top in anywhere in the world for those people who are concerned about climate change. The not so good news, if you like, was that whereas the broadsheet media had a lot of coverage in many countries, it wasn't an issue that the tabloid media did a lot of coverage on. In other words, it remains a really difficult challenge to get climate change, environment as a popular issue in mainstream media. And the other top line, if you like, of what we discovered was that the journalists were not very good at including background information about the science in their reporting. There were some very important exceptions to that, but the general trend was that most of the articles, 80%, had less than 10% of the coverage of Copenhagen about the science. Now you could say journalists are attracted to drama, adversarial politics, etc., and not climate change. But here was a great opportunity. 4,000 journalists at Copenhagen. There's been no other political event, as far as we know, where there have been that many journalists. Of course, the World Cup and the Olympics, yes. And here was a great opportunity to explain the science. But on the whole, journalists didn't do that. So what we were trying to do in the study was to look at ways that how do you make these really important long-term, slow-fuse issues like climate change, like sustainability, like biodiversity, entertaining. As Pedro was saying, how do you make them fun, interesting, relevant to people's lives. And I'm sure we'll come back to this, but new media is one of the really, really important ways that you can do that. But I'll leave it there for the moment.
So let me ask you a very concrete and perhaps difficult question. 2 days ago, CNN and Televisa, the national Mexican broadcasting network here in Cancun, publicly committed to integrating more of the environmental issues into their core programming. And that really felt a bit like PR, like public relations. Yeah? What is your view? I mean, if what can leaders do, and how can the media, big marketing machine, become a force for change? Is that realistic?
Well, I don't think it's the role of media. You may shout at me, but I don't think it's the role of media to be advocates or necessarily to be a force of change. The role of the media is to present accurate, interesting, entertaining information so that the general public can make their decisions. But in the case of television, it really is important because despite the advances of social media, in most media landscapes of the world, with the exception of Africa, TV is still by far the most dominant way that people receive information about climate change. And it's also by far the most trusted source of information, even though it's changing with new media. So television will remain extremely important. I would make one final comment on whether they're going to do more on the environment. If they do, it's great, but I'm slightly surprised because CNN cut their science and environment correspondence a couple of years ago. But I would make one point. I think part of the problem is that for the media, environment is put in an environment ghetto. And what the media must try and do, in my view, is treat it as an economic issue, a health issue, a technology issue, a transport issue, an international politics issue. And because it's kept in a green ghetto very often, I don't think it gets anything like the coverage that it should do.
Thanks, James. Leonardo, your influence in the thinking, the ethics of religion, of human rights in Latin America and the rest of the world is just enormous. But religions are very much the pillar of what we believe to be right and wrong and how we see the world. And in many ways, it seems to be sort of absent from this sort of debate of how we can shape people's perception on possibilities, on ethics. Do you see religion in a very practical way? Do you see religion as a tool or as an obstacle to change?
I will speak in German. Meine Damen und Herren. Ja, entonces hablamos en cristiano. Quiero empezar con un pequeño cuento. Que dos rabinos están en un barco en el mar. En el lado de un rabino hay un hoyo en el cual entra agua. ¿Quiere ya traducir?
He wants to start with a story that there are two rabbis in a boat. On one side of the boat there's a rabbi with making water. The boat is making water.
Entonces el rabino que estaba de esta parte le dije, mira, de tu lado hay un hueco, hay un hoyo en el cual entra el agua.
The rabbi from the other side said, look, at your side of the boat, there's a hole and the water is coming in.
Y añadió, a mí no me importa, porque el agua entra en tu parte.
And the other one said, I don't care because the water is coming in your part, it's in your part.
Yo creo que la situación de hoy es un poco así. El agua está entrando en el barco de la tierra y las personas dicen, no importa, está entrando la parte de un lado solo, sin darse cuenta que el agua va entrando y los dos rabinos van a hundirse con su barco en el mar.
So the situation of the world is similar. The water is coming, inundation the world, and there going to be affectation for both of the two rabbis.
Yo creo que la situación de hoy es que no hay una arca de Noé que salve a algunos. y deja perecer los demás. Desta vez o nos salvamos todos o todos nos hundimos porque no hay una arca de Noé.
So the situation nowadays is there's not going to be a Noah's Ark. The situation is either we all save together or we all be not saved together.
Entonces, cada instancia, cada ciencia, cada religión, cada grupo, cada gobierno tiene que dar su colaboración porque el problema es global y afecta globalmente y individualmente.
So the role of science, religion, governments is to collaborate together because that's the way it's going to have to be.
Las religiones, a mi juicio, tienen una función muy importante.
Religions play a very important role in this.
Porque las religiones trabajan con actitudes que están muy ausentes y son necesarias de cara al problema ecológico.
Because religions work with attitudes that are absent and they're very important to reach the last part, what?
Para el problema ecológico.
For the ecological problem.
Por ejemplo, una actitud fundamental de la religión es la veneración y el respeto.
For instance, one very important attitude of religion is veneration and respect.
Yeah. No solamente de cara a los libros sagrados y a los lugares sagrados,
Not only in the face of sacred books and sacred places,
sino respeto y veneración de cara a todos los seres, porque son seres creados por Dios.
but respect for all the human creation because they're all creations of God.
Esa actitud de respeto y de veneración es fundamental de cara a la naturaleza y a la madre tierra.
This attitude of respect and veneration is fundamental in the face of Mother Nature, Mother Earth.
Pero en nuestro modelo, en nuestro tipo de sociedad, nuestra forma de producción y de consumo, no tenemos ningún respeto con los ecosistemas, con los ritmos de la naturaleza.
But in our model, in our consumption society, we don't have any respect with nature.
En segundo lugar, la tradición judío-cristiana impone al ser humano una misión, que es de ser el cuidador y protector del jardín de Edén, es decir, cuidador y protector de la tierra.
In the Jewish and Christian tradition, it imposes to the human being the role of being the protector of nature. And care, protect and care about nature.
Exactamente esta misión tenemos que actualizarla en nuestras prácticas cotidianas, en la relación con la naturaleza, cuidar de todo lo que existe y vive, porque cada ser tiene un valor intrínseco y todo lo que existe merece vivir y todo lo que vive merece vivir.
We have to give this importance because everything that lives deserves to live.
It has an intrinsic value.
And it has an intrinsic value. I lost in translation.
And have to respect.
Yeah,
to be respected. And
Okay.
have care for everything. Perdona. Porque
No, I'm sorry.
termino esa parte con un dato que me parece interesante.
I end up this part with the fact that it seems to me very interesting.
El más grande biólogo vivo hoy, Edward Wilson,
The biggest biologist living today, Wilson,
escribió el último libro que se llama Creación, cómo salvar la vida en la tierra.
wrote his last book about creation and how to save life on earth.
Es una carta abierta a las religiones.
It's an open letter to society, to religions,
Y él propone una sagrada alianza
and he proposes a sacred alliance
entre los dos poderes que él considera más fuertes en el mundo hoy,
between the two powers which he considers the most powerful today,
que es la tecnociencia
technoscience,
y las religiones del mundo.
and the world's religions.
Entonces dice él, si no
He says-
hacemos esa alianza sagrada,
He says that if we don't do this sacred alliance,
posiblemente no vamos a tener las actitudes que van a salvar la vida.
we possibly are not going to have the attitudes that are going to save the life.
Entonces dice él, las religiones ayudan a la ciencia
So he says that religions help science
a ser hecha con conciencia,
to be made with conscience,
en función de la vida y no del mercado.
with respect with life and not the market.
Y las ciencias ayudan a las religiones
And sciences help religions
a superar sus dogmatismos y fundamentalismos
to go beyond their fundamentalisms and materialisms
y buscar los valores esenciales de todas las religiones,
and to search the fundamental values in all religions,
que es el respeto y la veneración de la última realidad
which is a respect and veneration of the last reality
que se encuentra dentro del mundo.
that's within the world.
Entonces me parece, y a él dice, yo no tengo fe,
And he says, I don't have any faith,
pero tenemos que rezar para que esa alianza ocurra,
but we have to pray for this alliance to happen.
porque si no la vida está amenazada.
Otherwise, life is threatened.
Gracias.
Thank you, Leonardo. Leonardo, sorry, just one very practical question. Towards Rio 20 plus, like it's been said before, if you could do one thing that is a symbolic initiative that could change the way people see the world and possibilities, what would you do? Would you create this alliance, and what would it look like symbolically?
Mira, yo creo que hemos tenido en la ECO 92 una gran experiencia de encuentro ecuménico de todas las religiones e iglesias,
I think that in 92 we had an ecumenic experience of all the gathering of all religions
con Dalai Lama y otros grandes líderes
with
mundiales,
Dalai Lama and other world leaders
que han hecho inmensas celebraciones,
that have made enormous celebrations,
despertando la conciencia
awakening the conscience
de que todos somos responsables por el futuro común.
that we are all responsible for the common future.
Y como yo he participado y visto, constatado,
And I have participated and I've seen and I've proved
eran las celebraciones donde más gente iba a participar.
where the celebrations were more people participated.
Porque uno se da cuenta que hay una búsqueda espiritual muy fuerte en la humanidad.
Because one becomes aware that there's a spiritual surge in humanity very strong.
Yo pienso que en el Río +20 hay que continuar esa tradición, hacerla todavía más multitudinaria.
I think that in Rio +20 we have to keep on this tradition and make it even more crowded with more people
para producir el sentimiento de mutua pertenencia
to produce the feeling of mutual pertinence
y nuestra responsabilidad común por la casa común, la tierra, y por el futuro del proyecto planetario humano.
for our common cause of this house we share in the world and for the planetary project.
Okay.
Muchas gracias. Thank you, Leonardo, very much. And while you were talking, the one thing that appeared in my mind was sort of young people. Was the first thought, and this sort of goes on to Kirsty. Kirsty, you are a champion of youth voices in many ways. In the international climate agreements, we've talked about governance. You've been pushing for the voice of young people to be part of the institutional vehicles and arrangements. And you've now started an initiative called Think 2050 that you're going to talk about a bit about right now. But my question is think about the afternoon when all of us will be getting together in three groups. One of them will be culture, will be symbolism. What sort of things would you like to see happen, or one thing that you would like to see happen between now and 2012 that really engages young people, mobilizes young people to the sort of things that Leonardo is talking about?
Thank you very much. Alejandro, is the microphone okay? So, buenos días. Mi nombre es Kirsty y en el año 2050 voy a tener 66 años. La primera vez que fui a la ONU como vocera de la juventud, sentí que mi voz no era escuchada. El cambio climático y la sostenibilidad son muy importantes para los jóvenes y las generaciones futuras. Ahora, conecto a organizaciones de jóvenes con gobiernos. So thank you very much for that. I hope it made a little bit of sense, and thank you very much to Alejandra and Rosa for translating this for me. I don't speak any Spanish, I speak French, so hopefully it translated okay. So thank you very much for inviting me to come and speak to you about what I do. So as you heard there, I try and bring the voice of young people to the government decision-making table. So after going to UN conferences, COP14, COP15, and trying to engage with our country delegations, young people felt very frustrated still. They felt like their voice was not being heard, and not only that, but they were being ignored, pushed to the sidelines. So this year, with the UK government, we have set up a program called the Youth Advisory Panel, and this panel of young people meets with the government department on energy and climate change to talk about what young people want to see in terms of the decisions made about their future. And that's part of the initiative Think 2050, so we're encouraging people to think about the year 2050 for young and future generations to safeguard our future. And what we did was we focused on energy, and for the last 6 months, we traveled around the country in England and we visited power stations, wind farms, solar panel plants, places that were reducing energy, electric car manufacturers, to try and understand what energy is, how it affects young people, and what young people want to see from our decision makers. And we produced our first report. It is called Energy, How Fair Is It Anyway? So underpinning everything that we do is this idea of fairness. How can a decision made today by our governments, by our leaders, by those who are part of the governmental system, how are those decisions going to impact on the young and future generations? And so now this has been formally submitted to government, and the government will be responding in 2 or 3 months' time. And now what we want to have is a global conversation. We want other young people around the world to think about ways that they can engage with their governments. I was very interested to hear from Ms. Silva about this idea of new politics. And I think young people understand social networking, social media, all being involved in the politics of today. And I think that possibly this is one practical example of how this can work. To answer your question specifically, I think young people sometimes feel that they're not being listened to, and that is confused with being apathetic. So sometimes we are told that we are apathetic. And what I say is that actually it's not that there is apathy amongst young people, it's this sense of being ignored. And if we together can provide an opportunity for young people to have a voice and to be engaged, then I think there will no longer be any apathy. It will be about becoming involved, collaborating with their decision makers, and really moving forward to this idea of the new politics and safeguarding our own futures together. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that. Since we don't have a lot of time, and the idea is that you talk to one another, think about this. We talked about young people voices, some of the experiments that are taking place with structures and ways of meshing youth voices with current politics. We talked about new ethics as the marriage between religion and science, and what will come out of that. But how can we push initiatives to create new imaginations of that marriage? And we talked about mass media, one of the big businesses in town, and real politics behind that. But also new media, and new media sort of connects the three conversations, isn't it? With young people using it and new forms of awareness. But now turn to one another in your small tables, and just talk quite openly about what are your reactions to all of this. What are you inspired by? But also thinking about the afternoon, where we want to start teasing out what are the 5, 6, 8 big ideas that we could be pushing towards 2012 that make some of these goals and some of these visions materialize and come true. Yeah, so we have some time. Just turn to one another, chat for a while, and then I'll let you know when we're off to lunch. Thank you very much to everyone. Yeah.
Well done, Kirsty. Very good Spanish.